What's going on, everybody? About a year ago, I did a video where I tracked some values. I went in, I did some research, and I found the values of a bunch of cards. One card per year for the whole decade of the 1950s. And I tracked the card in every grade, from PSA 1 to PSA 9. And I went through each of those cards and I compared the values from 2022 to 2023. I did like a 1 year, year over year comparison to get an idea of what the market was doing. And it was a to me, it was a really interesting batch of data to look at, to get a snapshot. Again, I realize we're not looking at 1,000 cards from, 100 different years. We were looking at one card, grades 1 through 9, for each year. And I started in 1959 and went back to 1951. And before I pulled any data, I just randomly picked a card for each year. Kind of what was the first card that popped into my mind. 1959, Bob Gibson. 1958, Yogi Berra. 1957, Sandy Koufax. 1956, Ted Williams, and so on. It wasn't like I didn't look at any data before I pulled it. No idea what I would find. Now, I'll put a link to that original video down in the comments below in case you want to check out the video that I did a year ago. But what I decided to do is take that data that we did in that video from May of 2023 and add the new data. Add data from May, the first quarter of 2024. So I've updated it. I've expanded it to include a third year to get an idea, again, not of a final answer of where things are, but to get a snapshot of what's happening in the market. And it could give us ideas about what's happening with different grades. Are low grades doing better than high grades? Or are high grades doing better than low grades? Gives us an idea about maybe different players or different sets. I thought it was interesting, and the feedback was very, very positive when I did this a year ago. And so I added in the data from quarter one, the last 3 months of 2024, and I compared the information for year over year. I compared it to 2023, and then I also compared it to the 2022 data to see what are the trends. What is happening with these cards after another year? And I found it to be extremely interesting. Were there some takeaways? I sure felt like there were. I'm interested in your takeaways when you see the data that I'm about to go over. And I have some summaries in there. I've got, a lot of different analysis for each card at each of the grades. I think you'll find it interesting, but I'm most interested in what you all see from this data because, at my work, there are lots of times that they'll give us a packet of data and they'll ask us to look at it and they'll kind of just go around and go, what do you guys see? What is the data telling you? What are the trends that you see? And there are times that some people find things and bring things up that others didn't really notice. And then once they point it out, you go, oh yeah, that's true. And that's what I'm hoping to hear from all of you. Now, I certainly share some of my conclusions in this video, but I also want to hear yours. Check this out, but more importantly, tell me what you think. Let's take a look.
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of those values a year ago. It's almost a little over a year ago, so about 13 months ago, and compare them to where we are now and the year prior. Okay, so let's take a look. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and you can kind of see what was happening a year ago. So here we are. Now, if you look, 1 year ago, and again, these are cards that were kind of randomly chosen. I just went year by year. First card that popped in my mind is the card that I used. So we have a 1959. We're going to go from 59 all the way back to 1950 and look for some trends and look for what are the changes and why. All right. So we have the 1959 Bob Gibson. So a year ago, you can see the prices from 2022 to 2023, the first quarter. So this is a 3-month average. And you can see that in all but one case, the Gibson was down from 2022 to 2023. All right. Down 7.6%. And you can kind of see here, it wasn't really much changed here in the 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 grades, I should say. And then the higher grade was where it was affected the most. So the really low and the really high. Okay, so if we look though, what has happened since then? So again, we have 2022 here and we have 2023. This is what we just looked at. And now we're jumping into 2024. So in 2024, you can see the PSA 1 is down a little bit. PSA 2 is up. But then the 3, 4, 5, 6 are all down. Not a lot. Only the 4 is down a decent amount. But then this is interesting. The PSA 7 is up and the 8 is up. So the 1 year return. So if we're looking again from 2023 first quarter to 2024 first quarter. Now, if we look at the percentages, you can see a little bit better. So again, we're just looking right now at 23 to 24. The 7 and the 8 are up. The 4 is down the most. And the 3, not a huge change. The 6, not a huge change. The 2 is up. So that's interesting. Now, if we look at the 2-year change, so this is comparing 2024 prices to 2022 prices. You can see the 4 and the 5 have done the worst. So again, when we were looking a minute ago, the higher grades did the worst from 22 to 23. But it's sort of the middle grades that have done the worst. The 4 and the 5 that have done the worst here compared to this year. So let's keep looking at Bob Gibson. So the 1 year average, the overall, the average of the averages. Okay, so the Gibson in first quarter of 2024 compared to the first quarter of 2023, when you go PSA 1 through PSA 9, almost flat. But the 2-year average, is down about 5.5%. So to me, the most relevant information is the last year, because the last year shows what has happened recently. We know in 2022, we were coming off of that huge peak, the huge spike. So the 2-year averages, I would think, would be higher than the 1, but it's pretty much flat across all the grades for the Gibson. So then I chose the 1958 Yogi Berra. Again, first card that popped in my mind a year ago when we did this. And when we looked, there were a couple where there weren't any sales in the first quarter. And so we have really the 3, the PSA 3. These are all PSA, by the way. 22 to 23 was down 25%. The 4 was up 17%. But as a whole, other than that 4, the Yogi was way down, 25 to 31.5%. And again, that was 2022 to the first quarter of 2023. All right. So let's see what has happened in the last year. Now, interesting that in the last year from 2024 compared to 2023, the green means it went up. The reds mean it went down. So look at this. The Yogi in a 3 up 44%, in a 5 up 24%, in a 6 up almost 66% in the last year. The 4 is way down. But again, when we go way down, let's be honest, this looks like an anomaly to me, because the 3 average price was $75 and the 4 was $61. So There might have been a really bad one that, is way off center or miscut or something that threw that number way down below. So you almost have to throw this out when the average of the 4 is lower than the average of the 3. Something happened with the data there. But for the most part, Yogi's up. And in the 8, it's down. It's down a little bit over 1 year, but look at compared to where it was 2 years ago. Part of what this tells me is, man, that 2022 peak was a massive peak, but especially on high-end stuff. The high grade, it was really high. The high, card player, really high. Because if we look at the 2-year average, look at this. The 9 and the 8, they're down over 40% each. The 6 is up a little, and the 3 is up a little. So over 2 years, Yogi's still not doing well. But again, to me, the most relevant information is the last 1 year, because it's kind of year over year, what has happened since the peak has crashed. Since the crash, I think it's fair to say, early first quarter of 2023, we were kind of through the crash. So since the crash, how have we done? That's the 1 year data. And for the most part, the Yogi is doing okay. In fact, an average of the averages, the Yogi is up over the last 1 year. And even though it's up over the last year, it's still down 15% over the last 2 years. So, yes, we weren't all the way at the end of the crash in 2022. So we were still crashing. But since the crash ended, we'll call the end of the crash, the beginning of 2023. Since then, the Yogi is actually up for all the grades combined, the average of the averages. Let's look at the 57 card. So the 57 card was Sandy Koufax. Look at all of the pinks. These are all of the ones that are down. So out of the grades that we had data for, we were down in 4 of the 6 cards. That's not good. Now, we were up on the 4, we were up on the 7. We didn't have data for some of the others. So clearly, from 22 to 23, things weren't good. But let's look at what things have been over the last year. Since the crash ended, what have they been year over year? Ooh, now this isn't ideal. The Koufax is down in a 2 grade, down in a 4 grade, down in a 5 grade, down in a 6 grade. So we really only have comparable data in 5 grades here for the last year over year. And it's down in 4 of the 5. Now, in fairness, for the 5, it's down, 4%. It's up 5.5%. It's down 6.5%. Really, the only ones that are a little bit concerning would be the 4 here and the 6. The 6 is a big problem. But again, the higher grades, those are the ones that seems to have maybe struggled. I don't know. In the 2-year numbers, this is interesting. And again, when we look at this one down 58%, part of it could be maybe this is an anomaly. Because look at this. The 57 Koufax in a 6 in 2022 is $501. Then it went way up to $1125. And then it went back down to $468. So it's actually kind of close to where it was 2 years ago. My guess is in quarter 1, there was an anomaly here. Maybe the data that got pulled, maybe one was signed or something. So it pulled the numbers up. It's hard to know, but that seems like an odd one there. Anyway, if we look at the year over 2 year data, down 19% in the 2, but then up in the 3 and the 4, and then down a little bit here in the 5, 6, and 7. So as a whole, this is interesting because Yogi was up and Gibson was basically flat over the last 1 year. But the 57 Koufax is down 15%. Does that mean that people are down on Koufax? Maybe. Or is it that maybe during the run up, people went in heavier into Koufax? Did they go heavier into Koufax than the Berra and the Gibson? Because the 1 year change here is down more than the 2 year change. But again, part of that is probably from that one anomaly data. That's why we're doing multiple cards of multiple players over multiple years. Because if we just looked at one card, we would go, wow, 1 year, everything's down 15%. So we have to look at a trend over a variety, right? Statistics require as many samples as possible, not just one. So let's keep looking. So look at Ted Williams, the 1956 Ted Williams. It was down in the 1, the 3, the 4, the 5, the 6, and the 7 from 2022 to 2023. It was down, and the only one it was up 2.3%. So basically, Ted Williams, the 56 tops Ted Williams got absolutely hammered from 22 to 23. So how's it done in the last year? Let's take a look. We'll look at that. The opposite. The 6 is up 55% year over year. The 5 is up 19%. The 4 is up 31%. The 3 is up 5%. And the 2 is down 16 and change percent. So in a year after the Ted Williams was way down, it's like sometimes when the stock market does one of these sell-offs, it'll kind of overcorrect and then it kind of rebounds back to where it should be. It looks like the Ted Williams overcorrected. And then this last year has been kind of like wait a second, that got too cheap. And it's kind of rebounded because he's up. And it's not just up in 4 of the 5 that we have data from. It's way up in 3 of those 4. Up almost 31%, 19%, and over 55% year over year. And compared to 2 years ago, it's even up compared to 2 years ago. They were all down last year. But from 2 years ago, it's still up in 4 of the 6. So for the 2-year average, Ted Williams is only down 1% now. When we just looked at the data from 22 to 23, and from 22 to 23, Ted Williams got absolutely destroyed, this card. But the average of the averages is up 19% in the last year and only down about 1% in the last 2. So it seems like it was an overcorrection and then a rebound over the past year. So it's like part of it is it the player? Or is it the year? Is it the set? Is it grades? We're going to look at all of that as we move forward. Don't worry. I'm not going to go just card by card. I'm going to then kind of, include everything. Let's keep looking. The 55 Willie Mays. So the 55 Willie Mays was up from 22 to 23. It was up from 22 to 23 in 4 of the 6. But it was down in the 2 highest grades. So again, when we hit that massive run-up, when we hit that peak, it seems like some of the cards that got most out of control were the high-grade cards. There was so much money going into cards. It wasn't just going into cards. It was going into high-end, high-grade cards. Those are the ones that seem like have kind of gotten hit the hardest from 22 to 23. But let's look at what's happened in the last year. So this is, again, interesting. The 1 is down from last year, but up over 2 years. The 2 is up from the last year and up over 2 years. The 3 is up over the last year and up over 2 years. The 4 is down over the last year, but it's up over the last 2 years. So Willie Mays in the last year, of the 4 that we can look at, is up in 2 of the 4 grades. For the last 2 years, Mays is up in 4 of the 6 grades. So Willie Mays has kind of weathered the storm. And what got hit the hardest? Again, the high grade card. So, I mean, look at what that card sold for, $9,550 for a 55 Willie Mays in an 8. That was the average in 2022. The average in the first quarter of 2024, 47.10. It's way down. So when the market peaked, it really seems to me like the highest run up were in the high grade cards. So they've come back to earth the most. But look at these lower grade cards, have all done okay. The 1 did not do well. But compared to 2 years ago, the 1 is up. It's just it's down from 2023 to 2024. As a whole, Mays is down 4% over 1 year and 5% almost over 2 years. But part of that is probably a result of this, right? When the 8 is down 50%, that throws a lot of the data off. But I look at this and I go, Mays has done okay. It's up year over year in 2 of the 4, and it's up over the last 2 years in 4 of the 6. The only place that really got hit hard is the high grade one. So again, we have 4.4% that is down over the last 1 year, 4.9% that is down over the last 2 years. Let's keep looking. So now, the best card ever, the 54 Ernie Banks. Now, of the 4 cards that we could compare, it was down in 3. And again, look at how hard it got hit in the high grades. Again, this is in 2022 to 2023. It was down 24% in the 7 and 19.6% in the 8. But the 4 was up, and the 1 was barely down, basically flat. The high grades got killed after the peak. So now if we look at year over year here, now this card hasn't sold a lot in 2024 and didn't sell a lot at the beginning of 2023. So we don't have a lot of data. That's one of the problems. It's one of the reasons, like when I did the 58 Berra or the 59 Gibson or so a lot of the times you guys go, why did you pick that card? Well, I wanted to pick some cards that had a lot of transactions. There are a lot of 58 Yogi Berras that are selling and Bob Gibsons that are selling. But the Banks is an expensive card, so there are a lot fewer that sell. Because there are a lot fewer that sell, we have less data to work with. And that's why I tried to pick a variety. So if we look in comparing 23 to 24, it looks like the PSA 4 is down about $132. And we don't really have data year over year here. But if we look at the 2-year change, it hasn't done well, but that's kind of, again, to be expected. It's a high-end card. It's an expensive card. The expensive stuff got hit the hardest. The high grade and the high price point cards. So 2 years, the Banks is down in a 2, in a 3, in a 4, and a 5, anywhere from 7% to 15%. 1 year over year, about 9%. But it's up in the 6. That's kind of interesting because we've seen the trend of the higher grades being hurt the most, but in the banks, that's not the case. I need all these to go down a little bit more so I can go buy mine. All right, let's keep looking. So the banks is down about 9% in the last year. It's down about 4% in the last 2 years. Again, the bank's data, I kind of take it with a grain of salt because there aren't nearly as many samples to pull from because it's a more expensive card, so there are fewer transactions that take place. It's down 4.25% over the last 2 years. It's down 9.18% over the last 1 year. Okay. Nothing crazy, compared to, that's the other thing. We have to keep in mind, it's not like this is a Kevin Durant rookie card that was selling for 1,000 and now it's selling for 40. That was a loss. But these, even after a massive crash, like an unprecedented crash in the card market, the banks isn't doing that bad. How about a 53 Whitey Ford? Now, again, I wanted to pick some different price points, but well-known names, well-known cards. Now, this is depressing. From 2022 to 2023, it was down in every grade that we had data for. It was down 2% in a 3, 6.4% in a 4, 4% in a 7. And a lot of not availables. That means there weren't a lot of transactions in Q1 of 2023. So let's throw in the more recent data. So the 3 is down a little bit. The 4 is up. Then the 7 is down a little bit. I wouldn't call that flat. It's down a little. So the Whitey Ford, down 15, up 10, down 2.5. So it's down a little. Now, is that because it's Whitey Ford? Is it because it's 53? Well, there haven't been a lot of transactions in this particular card. Now, let's look at the 2-year change. Again, we expect these to be pretty high. It looks to me like the PSA 3 has gotten hit fairly hard. The 3 is hit hard, but the 4 is up a little in the 2-year numbers. And then the 5, 6, and 7 are down a little, 3.8%, 1.45%, and 6%. So I look at this and I go, okay, it's not great. It's not horrible. Again, this is an unprecedented crash that we had 2 years ago to where we are now. So the 53 Whitey Ford over 2 years is down 5%. And over 1 year is down 2.5%. Again, this is an average of the averages. That's not that bad. That's not that bad. Now, some people would say, Greg, you're not factoring in inflation. And that's true. We aren't factoring in inflation. You have to consider the fact that, a year or two ago, inflation was like 8%. And now we'll say it's 4 or 5 or whatever the government says that it is. Well, if our money is worth, 10% less or something over the last 2 years, and it's down 2.5%, it's really the card is kind of down 12.5%, right? I mean, that's if inflation is making our dollars worth less and the values are dropping. So that is definitely something to factor in, but it's not like the cost of everything is going down, right? The cost of most things has gone up a lot. So when something's going down, that actually means it's gone down more than it appears. But that's a whole different topic for a different day. All right, let's take a look at our next one. Now, this wasn't again, I just randomly picked cards. Not a lot of people were selling the 52 Eddie Mathews in Q1 of 2023. So you got to go, why would that be? Well, my guess is when expensive things, and this is a very expensive card. I mean, I think it was Mike Moynihan was saying on Bench Clear Media. I think it was on Bench Clear Media, or maybe it was his own channel. He was saying, the most expensive Topps rookie card of all time is the 52 Eddie Mathews. People say, no. The Mickey Mantle 52 Topps is more, but that's not his rookie card. The most expensive Topps rookie card ever is the 1952 Topps Eddie Mathews. You say, well, why? Well, number one, it's the 52 set. Number two, it's a high number. Number three, it's Eddie Mathews' rookie card. But probably most importantly, it's the last card in the set. And when people were collecting cards and putting them in number order and then wrapping rubber bands around them, that first and last card, the Andy Pafko and the Ernie Banks, got absolutely destroyed by rubber bands and the piles that they were stacked in. So let's see what this card has done over the last year. So this is really, really interesting. Really interesting. There haven't been a ton of sales, which is to be expected. Again, like I said a minute ago with the banks, the more expensive the card, the fewer transactions there are going to be because there are fewer people that can participate in a card that's this expensive. Well, the PSA 1 2 years ago was $2,200. The 2024 average so far, $3,100. It's up 40%, 39.5%. The only other one we really have to compare is the PSA 3. The PSA 3 went from 3,200 in 2022 to in 2024, 6,500. It's up over 100%. The Eddie Mathews card is on fire. Now, a lot of the 52 Topps cards are on fire. The Jackie Robinson is way up. The Willie Mays is way up. The Mantle's come down a little bit from the peak, but over the last year and a half, 2 years, it's holding its own. Super interesting how much this card is up. So the 2-year average, it's up an average of the averages, 70.82%. And we don't have really data for the last 1 year because there weren't any sales in Q1 of 2023. So the Mathews is going way up. So is that a 52 thing? Is that an Eddie Mathews thing? Yeah. Hard to know. Again, we can't draw any direct conclusions on this. All we're doing is we're looking at some data. With this, Greg, come on, man. You can't just look at 10 cards and expect to understand what the market is doing. I agree. You can't look at 10 cards and know exactly what the market is doing. But you know what? If you look at 10 cards, it gives you more information than if you look at none. If I did 100 cards, I would have more data than if I looked at 10. But 10 at least gives us a snapshot. So, the comments are going to be, Greg, this is just so unreliable. It's so anecdotal. It's only 10 cards. True. But a truly random sample, which is what this is, only requires a sample of 30 to be statistically significant data. And we're doing 10. And these cards couldn't be more random than me just popping in my head. So it gives us some data. Is it perfect data? Of course not. I'm not claiming to be providing, data that, some research group would publish. All right, the 51 card is the Warren Spahn. The Warren Spahn didn't have a ton of sales in 2023. And again, you're starting to get into some of the older cards too, is, you're starting to see more NAs because the older cards, there's just not as many of them. There are a lot more 59 Bob Gibsons than 51 Warren Spahns. So there's just not going to be as many transactions. And what we found here basically was, just really one to compare. So let's see if there was more data from 2024. There is. There's a lot more data. Now, if you look at these, the Spahn is down in the 4, 27.9%, and it's down in the 7, 36.6% year over year. So again, went from $215 in quarter 1 23 to $155 in 24. Went from 460 in a 7 in 23 to 292 in 24. So those two didn't do too well. But the 3 is down $3, which, because it's not super expensive, is 2.9%. But the 2-year change up 20% in the 4. But then look at this: the higher the grade, the more the drop. The higher the grade, the more the drop. That kind of seems like it's been the theme. For the most part, the higher the grade, the more the drop. Why would that be? Well, if we're entering in tougher economic times, if people are tightening their belt a little bit, if people are socking away money and not going for high-end cards, when things are tough, what gets hit first? Luxury items, right? When COVID hits, when economic downturns hit, the vacation industry takes a dump. They're not selling tons of boats, right? Country clubs aren't adding lots of new members during recessions. So, same thing with cards, is expensive stuff, high-end stuff gets hit the hardest. That's just like Econ 101. So the 51 Warren Spahn 1-year average down 22.46%. Now I'm totally fine with this as a Warren Spahn collector. And that's the other part, is what does all this mean? Greg, what does this mean? Who cares? Why are you talking about this? Well, don't we want to know what's happening with the market? Because I look at this and I go, oh man, the 51 Warren Spahn is way down over the last 2 years and last 1 year. Maybe now's the time to buy mine. Now I have this card. But if you don't have a card like this, when it's down, it's time to buy it. It's not time to sell it. You don't sell when everyone's selling. You sell when everyone's buying. It's counterintuitive. It's the contrarian belief. It's the Warren Buffett belief. You do the opposite of what everyone's doing. When everyone's selling their houses and giving their houses away, that's the time to buy rentals. You sell your house when it's hitting record prices and interest rates are high. All right. And the 1950 Bob Feller, again, not a ton of cards, which isn't super hard to believe, since when things are down, people aren't selling as much. But again, this card, the older cards, there's just going to be fewer transactions. But we have the $60 for a 1, $196 for a 3, which, if you compare to 2 years ago, basically flat, down $4, so down 2%. But then the 5 is up from 270 to 327, so it's up 21%. So again, not a lot of data, but it still gives us a little bit of a snapshot. So the 2-year average is 9.5% up for the Feller. 1-year average, again, not enough data. That's why I didn't do just the 1950 Feller and just cards from the 50s. Tried to do it over an entire decade to give us a broader look at what's happening. So here's all on the same screen, all of the cards. So the Gibson 1 year, basically flat. 2 years down 5.5%. The Berra up 16% 1 year, down 15% 2 years. The Koufax down 15% 1 year, down 4.5% 2 years. The 56 Ted Williams up, way up, almost 19% 1 year, down 1% over 2 years. The Mays is down 4%, 4.5%, 5% over the last 2 years. The Banks rookie over the last year is down about 9 and about 4 over 2 years. The Whitey Ford, see, I look at this like the Whitey Ford down 2.5%, basically flat. Nothing significant. Now, to me, the Berra over 1 year, that's a significant change. But this is not, the 1 year average of the Bob Gibson. That's not significant. Basically flat. Again, inflation is a bigger effect to consider than being down 0.86%. So the Whitey Ford is down 2.5% over 1 year, 5% over 2 years. This is so crazy to me. This Eddie Mathews over 2 years is up over 70%. The 51 Spahn down 22%. That's significant. And over 2 years down 15%, 15.5%. That's significant. And then the Feller, the 1950 Bowman Bob Feller, is up 9.5% over 2 years. So I wanted to kind of show them all in one place. Certainly interesting in my eyes. Again, the things that stick out are the 58 Berra being up, the 56 Ted Williams being way up, and the 2 year change of the Eddie Mathews. To me, the Bob Gibson, not super crazy. The change in the Berra is interesting. Why is the 57 Koufax down so much? Is it because it got run up during the peak? I don't know, maybe. Why is Spahn down so much? I don't know. Whitey Ford basically flat. Banks down a little bit. Why? Probably because that would be because it's an expensive card. Although look at the Eddie Mathews. Like that doesn't go together. The Eddie Mathews being way up, and that's the most expensive card on the screen. Well, let's look at the grades. This tells a story. Look at the story that this thing tells. So the 2 year change of a 1 is up 20%. The 2 year change right over here on a PSA 1 is up 20%, but it's down. So when cards were crashing, were people buying low end cards? Because look, the 3 is up 11% over 2 years. And the 1 is up 20.5% over 2 years. This is post like basically after the crash. Have people just gotten into owning copies of the cards, not worrying about condition as much? Because when you look down at the 2 year, I mean, 8s and 9s just gotten crushed, absolutely crushed over the last 2 years. And this is again kind of post, after what has happened since the peak. The 3 is up, the 1 is up over 2 years, the 6 is up over 2 years. So this would be, these are all 50s cards. A lot of people call these 5s collector grades. Over 2 years, that's down. But above that is a little up. So the things that stick out to me here are the 1s being way up over 2 years, the 3s being way up over 2 years, and the 8s and 9s being way down over 2 years. The 1 year change that sticks out to me, I mean, 6s are way up. Is that the one they call investor grade? I don't know the names. All the people call them all sorts of things. 1 above the decade. I don't know. I think that might be what people call it. Sixes, on average, are up 15% over the last 1 year. Sevens, though, down 11%. So this is starting to get into the luxury category in the sevens, eights, and nines, right? Luxury down here, more normal and normal folks here in the middle. I don't know. I found this data to be really, really interesting. I'm really curious to know what everybody else thinks about this data. Let me know.